in many ways, they. But then what these folks realized is, okay, so you've got candidate A then that is in a district that could be in play and might actually switch from R to D. How do we make it happen? And Congressman Polis was pretty blunt, and he said, we ran this like a business. We had a good product. We polled to find out what the audience wanted, and then we marketed that product. We spent to do what we had to do, and we won. If that's not a Republican kind of theme to it, of operating a business successfully, what is? So it wasn't as if, it's an important point to have good candidates without, and Governor Ritter points out in the book too, with all the money in the world, you can't get a bad candidate elected. So
wait a second, he was elected. Leave that one alone.
All right, I can't.
You can't do that. All right, here we go. What the left was able to do it was to put together a long-term vision. So instead of having, the party doing the recruiting and the party doing the get out the vote effort and the party doing litigation and the party doing policy work and the party doing media work and the party doing think tank stuff, they said, wait a second, let's just break this up. What we're going to do is we're going to put out some money. Well, here's some money for the Bell Policy Center to put up money, and Bighorn Center put up some stuff what they do. We'll put a Media Matters, the first one on the state ground. There used to be a federal one. We had MoveOn.org out in D.C. We're going to pay for Progress Now here. There was Ethic Watch, which would only watch the ethics of Republicans and put in lawsuits. They put together this whole system. But what was amazing to me that Republican funders never do is, one, they said we're going to pay for a long-term vision. We're going to put this in for 3, 4, 5, 6 years. And secondly, we're going to relatively keep our hands off. That is, we're not going to micromanage. And I've got to say, a lot of Republican funders like to get some money into a campaign and then tell them how to run this. None of this was about the campaigns per se. They were about the different capacities. Am I right?
Yeah, it was a very selfless, movement-oriented mentality. And that was, we're building something for the long term. The head of the Colorado Democracy Alliance, which is this round table, what it turned into when they had all of these different entities around the table, she said,
this was King Arthur's court, basically, that these four guys brought all the people together.
And more donors. After 2004, they brought a lot more donors on. They brought more groups in. And they said, we're building, the head of the Democracy Alliance said, we're building a fiscal irrigation system that's going to yield a harvest in the fall, but it's also going to sustain itself beyond that. And so traditionally, on both sides, the right and the left, the election ended after Election Day. What they decided was, we're going to be every bit as active and robust and focused the day after the election as we are the day before. Because in order to build and sustain a political movement, you need a long-term vision. And that's what they brought to the table. And that's what they've had ever since.
And those folks, John, spent an awful lot of their oon money.
How much of their own money?
Millions. I think it's safe to say, if you aggregated all of it, it's easily $3+ million from Tim Gill, Pat Stryker probably in the same
probably
amount.
more.
Oh, I think it's more.
Yeah, it's hard to tell because it's not all. Some of it's disclosed. Other organizations don't make disclosures, so there's a lot of guesswork involved. But it was a very major commitment. And what's interesting about these donors, another piece of their vision was, when you get donors who have this much, this many resources and this much ability to have influence, normally they're focusing on presidential races, U.S. Senate races. The glamour races, right? What they realized was, very wisely, I believe, is that look, a lot of public policy happens at the state level. And a lot of public policy issues that they care about. For example, Tim Gill really cared about gay rights. That happens mostly in state capitals. There's not much going on in Congress. Sure, Congress debates a federal marriage amendment a little bit, but when you look at the actual legislation getting passed, it's at the state capital level. And they also realized, number one, that policy happens there. Number two, that those were that's the farm team for the up-and-coming future leaders. But also, there's a lot of bang for your buck at that state legislative level. Nobody had ever taken that kind of campaign model, that level of sophistication, to state house races before. And when they did, it totally overwhelmed the other side.
Let's talk a little bit about the sophistication in that, as we said, these are guys who are tech savvy. We Republicans, you go into the average Republican home, the VCR is still flashing 12, which leads to two comments, which is, one, don't they know how to program the VCR? And two, what kind of Neanderthals still have VCRs? So those are Republicans. Here they had technologically savvy people who actually understood the data mining that can happen, how to get messages out, how to get the Google wars, that is to win when somebody puts in a politician's name that their stories come up. They understood this.
Good example. Starting back in 2004, they advertised at twice the minimum wage for workers to go out with PDAs to actually go knock on doors, and they'd show up, say, at my house, because I was an unaffiliated Jefferson County voter at the time, and they'd have my data file already in their PDA. Whatever conversation we would have, they would get whatever other information they could. They'd walk around the corner, they'd enter that in. At the end of every day, they would upload all of these into a master file at the Teamsters headquarters, into a master database, and then the very next day, either I would get a phone call related to the issue that I had just talked to them about, or a piece of mail. I mean, it was micro-targeting.
Right. So in other words, they go to your house and say, hey, what are you interested in? You say education and, of course, Asian pornography, and they type it in there, and then Adam Schrager gets a call the next day saying, hey, we're trying to educate Asian porn stars, and we want your help. And that's how they would actually get down to the level of what it is you wanted. Now, Republicans were still sending out postcards saying, I think people like education, and if you were into guns and you were into taxes, you get an education card saying this candidate's great on education.
Well, they basically were doing what Karl Rove was doing in Ohio and Florida at the time, which was micro-targeting. I mean, basically, you would get the magazine subscriptions for Field and Stream, say, for example, and he would figure those are going to be likely Republican voters, and he'd target campaign messages to them. That's what these folks did. They let these people, by the way, take their PDAs after the election. They got to keep them, so there was a little incentive there for these folks. But it was just at a local, I mean, you can't say that they didn't deal with local issues. They did. That's exactly what they did. They just had the money to make sure that it was extremely local, to the point where individual households were targeted for individual votes.
Let me ask you about the money, because the image is, we Republicans, I have no idea what you are, but we Republicans, we're part of this greedy, rich group of people, and we got guys who can write checks. You talk to somebody with a fancy last name, and they write you big checks, and we got money flowing. When in fact, it was actually quite the opposite in the last several years, that these guys were investing, the left was investing in candidates, but infrastructure, technology, organizations, and our guys, 3 months before an election go, we got to get Pete Coors elected. We need to send him a check. From their point of view, 3 months towards the election, it's already done.
Yeah, well, and it's they are very committed to change. They're very committed to their vision, their progressive vision, and they're selfless in their commitment. It's not a short-term commitment. They're not going to go away. They're not.
When you talk about them, you're talking about the funders. You're talking about Tim Gill, Pat Stryker, Rut Bridges,
and there are many others, not just here in Colorado, but around the country. I mean, and by the way, it's not just about money. I mean, there's plenty of money on the right as well. It just hasn't been as engaged.
But they don't spend it. Trust me, as a guy who runs one of those capacity shops, they don't spend it on think tanks. They spend it on sexy candidates. And over the last several years, they've lost because of that.
Well, candidates come and candidates go. That's the reality. And personality-driven movements tend to rise or fall on the personality of who's leading them. One of the things they've really done well is to depersonalize their movement. The movement is about ideas, not people. And the ideas are progressive ideas that they share. And they can withstand those changes, those natural ups and downs of election cycles, and it's a very smart. I mean, this could have come out of a Harvard Business School case study. And what's interesting about it, and we've talked about it here, is that just the focus and discipline that they took to this. Whereas on the Republican side, there was more what you would consider kind of bureaucratic, locking up and conflict. This was an organization that runs very smoothly, because everybody is on exactly the same page.
Talk to me about gay rights, because it seems to me that you look at these four guys, and Tim Gill's gay, Jared Pollitt's gay, Pat Stryker has a gay brother. I know that these were big issues. I get a sense that Tim Gill, one of the masterminds behind this was about gay rights for him, was it not?